smell reaches you before anything else. Not gunpowder, not blood, not the sea. Vinegar, cold vinegar, splashed across the planking of the lower deck to keep infection from spreading through the wood itself. You have scrubbed this smell into your hands so many times it no longer leaves. It is the first thing you notice in the morning. It is the last thing you smell before you sleep. You are 24 years old. You are a surgeon's mate aboard the most famous warship in the British Royal Navy. And in a few hours, you are going to watch a man die in your arms. Not just any man. You have heard his name since you were a boy standing in the mud of a Yorkshire field, listening to your father talk about the Battle of the Nile, about the admiral who could not be beaten, about the admiral who lost his eye and kept fighting, who lost his arm and kept fighting, who sent the French fleet to the bottom of the Mediterranean and smiled while he did it. You are going to watch him bleed out on a cot 6 feet from where you are standing right now. And you are not going to be able to save him. The bullet that enters his shoulder will travel downward through the lung and lodge against his spine. William Beatty, the ship's surgeon, will kneel beside him and press 2 fingers into the wound and feel for the ball and find nothing. And he will look up. And the look on his face will tell you everything before he says a single word. But that is later. Right now it is the night of October the 20th, 1805. The lanterns on the lower deck are burning low. Somewhere above you on the gun deck, men are sleeping beside their cannons. 32-pound guns, 60 of them just on that one deck. This ship carries 104 guns across 3 gun decks and a forecastle and a poop. She weighs 3,500 tons when she is fully loaded, and she is fully loaded now. 821 men are asleep or awake on this ship tonight. By tomorrow evening, 57 of them will be dead. You know that number now. You did not know it then. Outside, the sea is a flat gray. The wind has dropped. The combined fleet of France and Spain is anchored 18 miles away off Cape Trafalgar, and they know we are here, and we know they are there, and nobody is moving yet because the wind is wrong, and the light is wrong, and the admiral is waiting. He has been waiting for 3 weeks. You are going to hear him say something tomorrow afternoon, when the ball has already entered him and the pain is already enormous and the deck above is still full of cannon fire. He is going to speak in a voice so quiet you will have to lean forward to hear it over the guns. He is going to say, "I have done my duty." 4 words, that is all. And then the world that made him is going to end. There are 33 ships in the French and Spanish fleet, 18 French, 15 Spanish. They carry a combined total of approximately 2,300 guns. They have been hiding in Cadiz for months, afraid to come out, afraid of exactly this, of the British fleet waiting for them in the Atlantic. And now Napoleon himself has ordered Admiral Villeneuve to sail. The Emperor is done waiting. The invasion of England was abandoned a month ago, but the Emperor's pride is not finished, and so the fleet is sailing, and so 33 ships are out there in the darkness right now, their lights moving slowly, their captains afraid. They are right to be afraid. You have been on this ship for 14 months. You know what she is. You have watched the gun crews run their drills in the Atlantic swell, loading and firing, until they can discharge a 32-pound ball in under 90 seconds. The French and Spanish crews take 4 minutes. You have done that calculation. You have stood on the lower gun deck and watched the numbers move in your head and tried not to think about what that means for the men on the other side. You are a surgeon's mate. Your job tomorrow is not to fight. Your job is to keep the men alive after the fighting finds them. You have been below the waterline before, in a drill, in the cockpit where the wounded come. It is a space roughly the size of a large kitchen, 6 feet from floor to beam, lit by lanterns hanging from hooks in the overhead timbers. The surgeon's table is a wooden door laid across 2 barrels. The instruments are arranged on a cloth to the left. Capital saw, bone saw, Catlin knife, tourniquet, 3 tourniquets. Needles already threaded with waxed linen. A bucket underneath the table for what comes off. You have seen what comes off. You know that a man can survive the removal of a limb if you work fast enough, and the shock does not take him first. The record for a below-the-knee amputation in combat conditions is 45 seconds. Batty has done it in under a minute. You have held the leg, and you have applied the tourniquet, and you have passed the instruments, and you have made yourself look at what you are doing, because looking away costs time, and time costs the man on the table. This is Quiet History at Bedtime. If this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us begin. Your name is Samuel Wick. You are 24 years old. You were born in the village of Skipton, in the West Riding of Yorkshire, in the winter of 1781. Your father was a cloth merchant. He died of a fever when you were 11. Your mother took in washing. By the time you were 13, you were working in the apothecary on the high street, grinding medicines, labeling bottles, watching the apothecary's hands when he dressed wounds, asking questions he did not always want to answer. At 17, you were apprenticed to a naval surgeon at the recruiting station in Hull. The work was not what you expected. There was very little surgery. There was a great deal of checking men's teeth and looking at their eyes and writing numbers in ledgers. But you watched, you learned. You read everything Beatty put in front of you, and when the Navy needed bodies to fill out the Victory's medical staff in the autumn of 1804, your name went on the list. You have not been back to Yorkshire since. HMS Victory is not a young ship. She was launched in 1765, 40 years before this moment. She is 186 feet long from stem to stern. Her mainmast rises 230 feet above the waterline. She has 3 gun decks, a lower deck, an orlop deck below the waterline, and a hold beneath that. She carries enough provisions to keep 821 men fed for 4 months at sea. She is, by any measure, an instrument of organized violence on a scale that most people who have never been aboard a warship cannot conceive of. You live on the orlop deck, below the waterline, below the gun decks, below the lower deck where the ordinary seamen sling their hammocks. The orlop is dark even in the middle of the day. The only light comes from oil lanterns. The timbers overhead are close enough to touch. The smell of the bilge is never entirely absent, but the orlop is also the safest deck on the ship during battle, because the enemy's shot cannot reach you here. The water outside the hull is 12 feet below the waterline, and 12 feet of seawater stops a cannonball. The men who sleep down here are the surgeon's mates, the loblolly boys who carry the wounded, the purser's clerk, the ship's carpenter's crew, and a handful of others whose jobs require them to be deep in the hull. You have become accustomed to the sound of the sea working against the hull planking, a low, constant flex and creak. In the Atlantic, when the swell rises, the whole ship moves like a living thing. A slow roll, a shudder along the keel, a return. You have learned to sleep in that motion. Most nights it takes you under inside 10 minutes. Not tonight. Tonight you are lying in your hammock in the dark and listening to the ship and thinking about the fleet 18 miles away. The political reality you are living inside is this. In 1805, Napoleon Bonaparte is the master of continental Europe. He has beaten the Austrians, beaten the Prussians, beaten the Russians at various points. He controls the coastline from Spain to the Baltic. His Grande Armée is the most effective fighting force on the continent, and he has spent 2 years assembling it at Boulogne on the French coast, 90 miles from Dover, preparing to cross the Channel and invade England. What has stopped him is not the British Army. The British Army is small. What has stopped him is the Royal Navy. As long as British warships control the Channel, no invasion flotilla can cross. Napoleon's plan has always been to lure the combined Franco-Spanish fleet into the Atlantic, draw the British away from the Channel long enough to cover a crossing, and then strike before the Navy can return. That plan failed. The combined fleet under Villeneuve ran to Cadiz instead, and Nelson followed, and now they are here, and the invasion is off, and Napoleon knows it, and he has ordered Villeneuve to fight or face a court-martial. So tomorrow the combined fleet will come out. And tomorrow HMS Victory will lead the British line directly into the combined fleet's broadside. That is the plan. You have heard it discussed among the warrant officers. Nelson's plan is not to approach in the conventional formation, a parallel line exchanging broadsides. Nelson's plan is to cut through the enemy line in 2 columns, decapitate it, cause confusion, and then fight ship against ship in a melee where British gunnery speed will decide everything. It is a plan that requires sailing directly into the combined fleet's fire for roughly 40 minutes before any British gun can return effective fire. 40 minutes of taking cannon fire before you can respond. You have thought about this number many times in the past 3 weeks. You lie in your hammock and listen to the ship and try to calculate. 821 men, 3 gun decks with 468 men serving the guns. The remainder in the rigging, at the helm, in the hold, in the cockpit, your cockpit. The orlop lantern sways slightly. The ship is barely moving. The sea tonight is almost flat. You can hear, faintly, the sound of water moving along the hull. Nothing else. The men in the hammocks around you are breathing slowly, or pretending to. You think about the instruments on the surgical cloth. Capital saw, bone saw, Catlin knife. 3 tourniquets, needles threaded with waxed linen, laudanum in a brown glass bottle, tincture of opium in alcohol for the worst cases. It will not be enough. Beatty has told you it will not be enough, and to administer it only when the pain is so severe the patient cannot be kept still for the operation. A man who cannot be kept still on the table is a man who dies on the table. You have a job. You know how to do it. You are going to do it. You close your eyes. The ship breathes around you. Above you, somewhere in the darkness of the great cabin at the stern, Admiral Horatio Nelson is also not sleeping. He is writing letters. He has been writing letters for several days. One to his daughter Horatia, who is 4 years old, and who believes her father is a friend of the family rather than her actual parent, because Nelson's relationship with Lady Hamilton is not something that can be openly acknowledged in 1805. One to Lady Hamilton herself. Long letters. Careful letters. He has written a private prayer in his diary tonight. You do not know this yet. You will read about it years later in a pamphlet sold on the streets of London. May the great God, whom I worship, grant to my country, and for the benefit of Europe in general, a great and glorious victory. He has also added in his own hand a codicil to his will. He is 47 years old. He has been wounded so many times that the list reads like a military inventory. Shot in the right elbow in 1797. The arm was amputated above the joint. He has learned to write with his left hand. He was struck in the forehead by a piece of langrage shot off the Nile in 1798. The wound was so deep the skin flap covering it could be lifted away to reveal the bone beneath, and he suffered headaches from it for years. He has one eye. He has one arm. He is 47 years old, and he has been in naval battles since he was 18. He knows what tomorrow means. He knows it more clearly than anyone on this ship. You do not know what he is writing, but somewhere above you in the darkness, in the great cabin with its tall stern windows looking out over the black water of the Atlantic, a man is finishing a letter and folding it carefully and sealing it with wax. You hear, very faintly, the ship's bell. 4 bells in the middle watch. 2 in the morning. You need to sleep. In 8 hours, this ship is going to sail toward 33 enemy vessels, and the men you cannot keep alive tomorrow are going to be dead because you were too tired to work the saw cleanly. You pull the hammock tighter around your shoulders. The vinegar smell is in your clothes, your skin, the rough linen of the hammock cloth. You close your eyes. Outside, across 18 miles of flat, gray Atlantic water, the lanterns of the combined fleet are moving in a slow drift. Villeneuve's flagship, the Beau Centaur, carries 80 guns and a crew of 930 men. She is anchored among 32 other ships of the line. 53 ships between the two fleets, carrying a combined total of 4,008 guns and 30,000 men, and enough black powder and iron shot to flatten a large city. And in 12 hours, all of it is going to be in motion. You let the ship's breathing carry you. The lantern above you steadies. The creak of the timbers settles into its familiar rhythm. The bilge smell, the vinegar smell, the faint sound of the sea working against the hull. You sleep. When you wake, it is still dark. The ship's bell rings. 6 bells. 3 in the morning. Around you the hammocks are beginning to move. Men waking, checking, settling back down. The gun crews above you will be roused at 5. The cook will light the galley fire at 4:30. At first light, lookouts will go aloft. You lie still for a moment longer and listen to the ship. Then you rise. The cockpit is already prepared. You and Beatty arranged it together yesterday afternoon in the gray light of a lantern, working methodically from the list, instruments checked and laid. Buckets positioned, the door across the barrels wiped down with vinegar solution and covered with a square of canvas, extra cloth for packing wounds, extra thread, a second bottle of laudanum wrapped in cloth so it will not break if the ship is struck. If the ship is struck. You check the arrangement again in the lantern light, moving each instrument slightly and then returning it to its position. You do not know why you are doing this. Everything is already correct. But your hands need to be doing something, and this is what they know how to do. Outside the cockpit, in the passage beyond, one of the Loblolly boys is sitting against the wall with his knees drawn up. He is perhaps 15 years old. His name is John. You do not know his last name. He carries the wounded down the ladders, 2 or 3 steps at a time, supporting them under the arms when they can still stand, and dragging them when they cannot. He has done this before, in the brush with Villeneuve's fleet off Cape Finisterre in July. He does not talk about that. He looks up when he hears you in the doorway. You look at each other for a moment. There is nothing to say. Both of you know what is coming. It is coming with the morning light, and there is nothing either of you can do to make it arrive differently. You go back into the cockpit and sit down on the deck with your back against the hull and wait for the sun to rise. The hull plank presses cold against your shoulder blades. 12 feet on the other side of this wood is the Atlantic Ocean. You breathe. Above you, one by one, the gun crews are waking up. You think about your mother, not deliberately. She simply arrives in your mind the way she always does in moments when there is nothing left to do but wait. She is in Skipton, in the house on the high street, still taking in washing, still rising before first light to get the tubs heated. She does not know where you are tonight. The last letter you sent was from Gibraltar 3 months ago. You told her the weather was warm and the food was adequate and that you were in good health. You did not tell her about the French fleet at Cadiz, or about Nelson's plan, or about the instruments you have been sharpening. She would not have wanted to know. You think about what you have learned in 14 months aboard Victory. Not the surgery exactly. The surgery came in pieces over time, each case adding something. What you learned that you could not have anticipated is this: the body is very determined to stay alive. Men you were certain would not survive the night were on their feet a week later, pale and careful and angry about it, in a way that seemed almost personal. Men who should have lived died anyway, quickly and without drama, their systems simply stopping for reasons you could not identify and Beatty could not explain, and the medical literature you had read offered nothing on. The body has its own logic, and it does not always share it. You have learned not to predict. You have learned to do the work in front of you, and not the work you imagine might be coming. The cockpit is ready. The instruments are laid. The buckets are placed. The laudanum is wrapped and secure. The door across the barrels is covered with clean canvas. John is in the passage with his back to the wall and his head dropped forward in sleep. He will wake when he is needed. You have done what can be done. The lantern above sways once, steadies. Outside, 18 miles of dark water, and then the combined fleet. Inside, 821 men who are sleeping or trying to. And you, sitting with your back against the Atlantic, waiting for the morning to decide what kind of day this is going to be. Above you, one by one, the gun crews are waking up. The galley fire goes in at 4:30 in the morning. You hear it through the hull structure, not the fire itself, but the sound of men moving toward the galley, the clink of iron pots, the low voice of the cook giving instructions to his assistant. On any other morning, this would be the signal to think about breakfast. Oatmeal porridge with salt. Hard biscuit if the porridge ran short. A ration of small beer, 8 pints per man per day, which sounds like a great deal until you understand that small beer is closer to water than to ale and serves mostly to replace what the salt in everything else takes out of you. On any other morning. This morning, nobody is thinking about breakfast. You hear the ship's bell, 7 bells in the morning watch, 5:30. The sky outside is not yet visible from where you sit, but you know from the movement of the men above you that the darkness is beginning to thin. Gun crew captains are walking the length of their decks, checking that the powder charges are in their cartridge bags, checking that the shot is stacked neatly in the iron rings beside each gun, checking the match slow cord that hangs burning beside each station in case the flintlock mechanisms fail. They will not fail, but the match burns anyway. It always does. You stand up, your back aches from the hull planking. You move into the cockpit and check the instruments one more time. Beatty is not here yet. He will come when he comes. For now, the cockpit belongs to you, and the lantern and the careful arrangement of metal tools on clean cloth. The capital saw is 20 inches long. The blade is set at an angle to the handle to give clearance from the body during the cut. You have sharpened it twice in the last week. A dull saw tears rather than cuts, and a torn wound takes longer to close and longer to heal, and is more likely to go putrid. You run your thumb lightly along the teeth, sharp enough to catch. You set it back on the cloth. In 1805, the medical understanding of infection does not yet exist. The connection between contamination and wound suppuration will not be established for another 60 years. What you know, what Beatty has taught you, what you have observed for yourself, is that clean instruments and clean cloth and vinegar on the wound seem to produce better outcomes than the alternative. You do not know why. Nobody knows why. You do what works. The laudanum bottle is against the far wall, wrapped in cloth. Tincture of opium, dissolved in alcohol. You have 8 ounces. For 821 men going into battle, 8 ounces is almost nothing. You will save it for the worst cases, the gut wounds, the men with shattered pelvis bones, the burns. A man losing a limb below the knee can be given rum and a leather strap to bite, and it is usually enough if you work fast. The men with gut wounds cannot be helped much regardless of what you give them. The laudanum will do something for the pain. It will not change the outcome. You know this. You try not to know it, and you know it anyway. The bell rings again. 8 bells. 6 in the morning. Change of watch. Above you, the ship shifts with the movement of 200 men rotating through their stations. You hear the pipes, the bosun's mates calling the hands, the creak of the upper deck planking under many feet. Then, clearly, through the structure of the ship, a single voice calling from above. You cannot make out the words, but the quality of the voice, the pitch and urgency of it, tells you what it means. The combined fleet is in sight. You sit down on the deck and fold your hands in your lap and wait. The morning moves slowly. You listen to the ship above you assembling itself for what is coming. Hammocks rolled and stuffed into the netting along the rails to act as splinter protection. Sand scattered across the gun deck planking so the men will not slip in blood. The gun port lids raised along the hull, the great squares of daylight opening one by one above you. You know from the light filtering down the ladder shafts, the sound of the guns being run out, the trucks of the gun carriages rumbling across the planking, the heavy iron muzzles settling in the open ports. 68-pound guns on the lower deck. That is the heaviest ordnance on this ship, the lowest tier, firing the largest shot. 32-pounders on the middle deck. 12-pounders on the upper deck. The carronades on the forecastle and quarterdeck, shorter range but devastating at close quarters. 104 guns in total, arrayed on both sides of the ship. In a full broadside, HMS Victory can throw approximately 1,500 pounds of iron shot in a single discharge. You think about that number, 1,500 pounds. In the time it takes to breathe in and breathe out, 1,500 pounds of cast iron moves through the air at roughly 900 feet per second. And what it finds, it destroys. The combined fleet can do the same thing. More than the same thing. They have 2,300 guns. Their combined broadside weight is heavier than ours. What we have is speed of fire. A trained British crew at a 32-pounder can load, aim, and fire in under 90 seconds. Their equivalents take 3 to 4 minutes. In a prolonged engagement at close range, speed of fire decides everything. This is what you tell yourself. You hear boots on the ladder. Beatty. He is a careful man, not warm exactly, but precise and calm in a way that is almost the same thing. He is perhaps 35, lean-faced, his dark coat already on, his instruments in the case he carries under one arm. He looks at the cockpit arrangement, checks 3 things with his eyes, adjusts the position of the bone saw by half an inch, and then looks at you. Satisfied, he says. You nod. He sets his case down and begins laying out additional supplies from it. 2 more tourniquets, a length of silver wire for suturing blood vessels, a set of artery forceps, which are not in common use yet, but which Beatty has learned to use from reading continental surgical journals, a syringe for injecting the wound channel with warm water to clear debris before closing. He works without speaking. You work beside him. This is the nature of the cockpit on the morning of a battle. There is nothing to say because you both already know everything that needs to be said, and saying it would cost time you do not have yet, and when you do have it, you will not want to waste it on words. The ship begins to move. You feel it before you hear it. A shift in the weight of the hull, a new angle to the creak of the timbers, The changed sound of water along the hull planking, the sails catching, the ship beginning to push forward. You are sailing toward the combined fleet. At a speed of approximately 2 knots. In a very light wind, the progress is almost imperceptible. 2 knots means 2 nautical miles per hour. 18 miles to the enemy fleet. In this wind, the approach will take most of the morning. That is 9 hours of sailing toward the enemy's guns. 9 hours of knowing. Batty sits down on the edge of the surgical table and folds his arms. You sit back down on the deck. The ship moves beneath you, slow and steady, the hull pressing forward through the water. Around 9 in the morning, you hear something that travels through the hull like a vibration rather than a sound. It is the drums. Beat to quarters. The marine drummers on the upper decks, walking the length of the ship. The drum rolls building and then resolving and then building again. This is the signal for every man to go to his battle station and not leave it until the battle is over or he is dead. The gun crews will be at their guns now, the top men in the rigging, the Marines at the rails with their muskets. The bosun and his crew ready to splice and plug whatever the shot opens up. And you are here, below the waterline, in the cockpit. Batty stands, you stand. You hear, faintly but distinctly, from somewhere above and forward, a sound that takes you a moment to identify. Cheering. Not the hoarse, all-at-once shout of men going into a charge, something more organized. Wave after wave of it, building and then falling and then building again, deck by deck, working its way through the ship from one end to the other. Then silence, brief silence, and then one more wave of it from a different quarter, higher up, further back. You look at Beatty. He says, the signal. You understand. The Admiral has run up a signal from Victory's quarterdeck. You do not know yet what it says. You will find out later, and you will find it in every pamphlet and newspaper and broadsheet sold in London for the next 20 years. England expects that every man will do his duty. That is what is making the men cheer. 11 words broken into flag code and hoisted above the quarterdeck of a ship approaching the broadside of 33 enemy vessels. You think, I expect to do my duty. I do not need to be told. And then you think, he did not say it for the men who already know. He said it for all the others. You pick up the capital saw and set it back down again. You straighten the cloth. You check the laudanum. You look at the arrangement of the cockpit and find that everything is exactly where it should be and has been for 3 hours. The cheering fades. The ship moves. The morning stretches thin and long. At approximately 11 o'clock, you begin to hear the enemy guns. Not our guns. Theirs. A distant sound, lower than you expected, more felt than heard, a kind of concussion that moves through the water and into the hull and arrives in your chest before it arrives in your ears. The combined fleet has opened fire on the approaching British columns. Long range, at first, 1,600 yards, maybe more. At that range, accuracy is poor, and much of the shot falls short, but some of it finds the hull. You hear it when it does, a crack and a thud, different from the working of the timber, sharp and definitive. Then the sound of men on the deck above you, moving fast. One of the Loblolly boys appears at the top of the ladder and comes down fast, stepping sideways, a man's arm over his shoulder. The man is walking, but barely. His left leg is dragging, and when the light from the lantern catches it, you can see that something is wrong with the knee. The angle of the joint not right, a splinter perhaps, or a ball that grazed rather than struck cleanly. Beatty is already moving. You move with him. You get the man onto the table. He is perhaps 30, broad-shouldered, a gun crew captain by the leather pad on his right shoulder from the recoil of the gun. He is not crying out. He is making a low, continuous sound that is not quite speech, and his hands are gripping the sides of the table with white-knuckled force. You take the left leg. Beatty examines the knee. He presses his fingers around the joint carefully, rotating the leg slightly, watching the man's face for the signals. A large splinter has entered the lateral side of the knee, just below the joint. It has not penetrated the joint cavity. Beatty looks at you. He says, "Probe and extract, no amputation." You know what that means. You pick up the probe, a thin metal rod, blunt-ended, and you begin. The man's grip on the table does not loosen. He does not make a louder sound. He breathes in short pulls through his nose and stares at the deck above him, and you work as quickly and cleanly as you can. Above you, the guns begin. Not the enemy's guns, ours. The first broadside from Victory is so loud it is not a sound at all. It is a pressure that moves through the entire structure of the ship simultaneously, through the decks, the hull planks, the masts, the very water beneath you. A pressure that arrives in every part of your body at once and leaves a ringing that does not fade for several seconds. The man on the table flinches so hard his knee moves, and you pull the probe back just in time. You press your free hand down on his thigh. Hold still. He holds still. Above you, 60 guns have just fired in sequence. And then, in under 90 seconds, they begin to reload. The rhythm of the gun deck becomes audible through the planking overhead, the trucks of the carriages rolling back, the impact of them hitting the breaching ropes, the rammer going into the barrel. The charge, the ball, the wad, rammed home. Run out, fire. Roll back, again. You are working the probe in a man's knee joint, while the most powerful warship in the British Royal Navy conducts a full broadside engagement 6 feet above your head. You find the splinter. You get the forceps on it. You extract it in 3 pieces, which is better than you expected, and you pack the wound and tie it off, and the man is taken off the table in under 7 minutes. The next one comes down before he is clear of the ladder. Then another. Then 2 at once. The cockpit fills. The Loblolly boys are working without stopping, going up the ladders and coming down with men and going up again. You lose track of individual cases. There is a man with a forearm that needs to go below the elbow, and you do it while Beatty works on a chest wound beside you. The forearm takes 40 seconds. The tourniquet holds. You close the flap of skin you have prepared and suture it shut, and someone takes him off the table, and the next one is already there. The guns above you do not stop. They have been firing for perhaps 40 minutes. The enemy guns are louder now, closer, and the impacts on the hull are more frequent. You hear the sound of shot coming through the upper works, the crack of timber. Once the shriek of a line parting under tension, the thud of something heavy hitting the deck above you. A ball comes through the hull, planking 18 inches above your head. It does not come through cleanly. It tears a ragged hole the size of a man's fist, and the light that comes through it is wrong, yellow and choked, full of smoke. And then it is gone, because a carpenter's mate is already there with a plug and a mallet, hammering oakum and pitch into the hole with methodical speed. You do not stop working. You have stopped counting the men on the table. There is always another one, and the one before is not yet off the table, and the space is too small for this number of people, and you work around each other by instinct, reaching past, stepping aside, handing instruments over without looking. Beatty is at the worst cases. You are at everything else. The laudanum comes out. You give it to a man with gut wounds. You look at him while you do it, and you make your face do the thing it needs to do, which is nothing, and you give him the dose, and you move on, because there is nothing else to do for him, and there are others who can be helped. And the rule you learned in 14 months is that you go to the ones you can save, and you do not linger at the ones you cannot. The guns go on. The sound of the battle above is no longer distinguishable as separate events. It is continuous. It is a condition. The ship vibrates with it the way a bell vibrates after being struck. And the vibration does not stop because the striking does not stop. And you work inside that vibration as if it were silence, because there is no alternative. Then, above you, something changes. The nature of the sound shifts. Not quieter, if anything louder, more complex, more layered, but the rhythm of it changes. The regular pulse of broadsides gives way to something more sporadic, more chaotic. You know what this means. The ships are in among each other now. The formation is broken. It is a melee, individual ship against individual ship, sometimes two against one, sometimes at ranges so close the gun muzzles are inside the enemy's hull before they fire. This is what Nelson planned. This is what he wanted. You are doing something to someone's shoulder. You have lost the precise sequence of what came before this. When you hear a sound from above that is not a gun and not a spar falling, and not any of the other sounds you have catalogued in the past hour and a half, it is voices, many voices, moving. Not the voices of men fighting, the voices of men carrying something heavy. You hear feet on the upper ladder, more than two men moving carefully, a weight distributed between them. You hear the shuffle of that weight coming down the ladder in stages, the careful negotiation of the narrow steps. You look up from the shoulder you are working on. The first thing you see is the coat. There is only one man on this ship who wears that coat with those epaulets and those decorations pinned to the breast. You know this without having to think about it. You know it the way you know the sound of the ship's bell or the smell of the vinegar. The men carrying him come through the low doorway sideways. His face is gray. His eyes are open. He is conscious. He is looking at the overhead timbers with an expression you cannot read precisely, something between attention and distance, the look of a man who is observing something that is both very close and very far away. He says something as they lower him. You hear two words. The second word is Beatty. Beatty is already there. You step back and you press yourself against the wall of the cockpit to give him room, and you watch William Beatty kneel beside Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson and press 2 fingers into the wound at the left shoulder and feel for the ball. He searches for a long time. Then he looks up, and you understand. You go back to the man whose shoulder you were working on. You finish the shoulder. You tie the last suture and cut the thread and press a folded cloth over the wound and tell the man beside you to hold it there, and he does, and you step back and look at what you have done, and it is sufficient, not good, sufficient. The wound is closed, the bleeding is controlled. Whether the joint will work again afterward is a question for another day and another place, and neither of those is here. You move to the next man. Behind you, Beatty is working on the Admiral. You can hear the quality of the conversation without making out the words. Low voices, careful voices, the kind of voices men use when the situation requires precision and there is no room for anything else. You do not turn around. The next man has a scalp wound. Scalp wounds bleed enormously. This one has bled down the left side of his face and soaked his collar and the front of his jacket. And when he came down the ladder, he looked like a man who was already dead. He is not dead. He is sitting up and blinking and pressing his own hand against the top of his head with an expression of mild inconvenience, which is the expression some men wear in battle to avoid feeling the thing they are actually feeling. Scalp lacerations bleed because the scalp is dense with blood vessels close to the surface. The skull beneath may or may not be intact. You press your fingers through the matted hair carefully, tracing the edge of the wound, feeling for the give of fractured bone. You find none. The bone is solid. The laceration is perhaps 3 inches long, ragged at the edges, but not deep enough to be dangerous if you close it correctly. You irrigate it with the vinegar solution. The man hisses through his teeth. You begin suturing. Above you, the guns continue. The pattern of the firing has changed in the last 20 minutes. It is closer now, more irregular. The intervals between shots shorter. The sound of impact more frequent. You can sometimes hear individual voices above shouted orders, the bark of a gun captain calling his crew through the loading sequence. The gun crews work in teams of 14 men per gun on the lower deck. 1 man at the vent with his thumb on the touch hole to hold the air in while the charge is rammed. 2 men on the rammer, 2 on the sponge. 1 man at the flintlock, the captain with the lanyard. The others handling the weight of the gun as it runs in and out on its carriage. 14 men, 1 gun. The rhythm of it does not change. They have been doing this for over an hour now. The heat coming through the deck, planking overhead, is not your imagination. Black powder, when it burns, produces carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide and water vapor and nitrogen and particulate carbon. In simple terms, it fills a closed space with smoke and gas and heat so quickly that the gun crews work half-blind inside 5 minutes. There are ventilation holes cut into the sides of the ship at the gun deck level, and men are assigned to fan the air with boards between shots. It is not adequate. It is what there is. You know that above you, men are working in a space that smells of burning and blood and sulfur, that is loud enough to deafen you within an hour. that is full of iron moving at 900 feet per second. And they are doing this with methodical, practiced speed. And they have been doing it for over an hour. And they will keep doing it until the battle ends or until the gun cannot be worked anymore. You tie off the scalp suture. The man with the inconvenienced expression thanks you. You look at him for a moment. You tell him to stay down here until someone comes for him. He says he needs to get back to his gun. You tell him his gun has 13 other men. He looks at you. He stays. The next one comes down. This one cannot walk. He comes down the ladder supported between two loblolly boys, his feet dragging, his face the specific yellow-white of a man in severe shock. His right thigh has been struck by something large. Not a ball. The wound channel is wrong for a ball. Too shallow, too broad. A piece of carronade round that has broken apart, or a section of chain shot, or a large splinter of timber driven by the impact of a ball striking nearby. Splinters kill more men in naval battles than direct shot. The timbers of HMS Victory are built from English oak. She contains approximately 6,000 trees worth of timber. English oak is hard, much harder than soft wood, and when a 32-pound iron ball strikes it, what the oak does is not shatter. It explodes inward. A single ball strike can drive splinters 18 inches long and 2 inches wide at velocities that match or exceed the ball itself. Those splinters do not stop at skin and muscle. They go through. You take the thigh. The wound is deep and wide, and you cannot immediately determine how much of the femoral structure is intact. You press your fingers in, and the man makes a sound that starts low and rises and then stops when his body decides it has used up what it can spare for sound. Beatty appears beside you. He takes one look. He looks at you. He says the word you knew was coming. Above. Meaning the femur is compromised. Meaning this leg is not going to stay. You get the tourniquet on above the wound site, as high as it will go on the thigh, and you cinch it. The bleeding reduces but does not stop entirely, which tells you the wound is above the tourniquet's effective point, which means you need to work fast. Beatty takes the capital saw. You hold the leg, both hands firm, your weight on it. The man has the leather strap. He has the rum, which he has taken in a quantity that will not be enough, but is what you have. Beatty begins. 44 seconds. You have timed him before, in training, and now you are timing him again without meaning to, because some part of your mind counts even when the rest of it is focused on holding a leg steady while the saw moves. 44 seconds from first cut to last stroke. You close the flap and suture the vessels and pack the stump, and it is done, and the man is alive. And whether he will still be alive in a week depends on things you cannot control in this room. You lower the leg into the bucket. You do not look at it again. Behind you, in the space where Beatty was working, Nelson is still alive. You know this because you can hear him speaking, not loudly, not continuously. Short phrases with pauses between them that are longer than the phrases themselves. You catch pieces of it in between the sounds of the battle and the sounds of the cockpit. He is speaking about the fleet, about the battle. He asks several times how things are going above. Hardy comes down at some point. Captain Thomas Hardy, commander of the Victory, a large, calm man who you have seen daily for 14 months. and spoken to perhaps 3 times. He comes down the ladder carefully, and he goes to where Nelson is lying, and he stays for several minutes, and then he goes back up. You hear the word victory from that direction. You cannot be sure in what context. The guns above you do not stop. You work. The cases come in a rhythm now, not overwhelming, not one at a time, a pace that the cockpit can manage if you do not waste motion. You have found something in the past hour that you have found before, in the brush with Villeneuve's fleet in July, a quality of attention that is not calm exactly, but is something like calm, a narrowing of everything down to the hands and the wound and the next step. The noise above becomes part of the structure of the room. The lantern swings. The hull shudders with impact. You work. A man comes down with a wound to the hand, 2 fingers gone, the third held on by a strip of skin. You take the 3rd finger. It takes 20 seconds. He thanks you. You are already at the next case before the gratitude has finished landing. A man comes down with a chest wound that you cannot help. You give him laudanum. You make sure he is lying on his side so his airway stays clear. You move on. A man comes down with burns on his forearms from a powder flash. Flash burns in 1805 come from the ignition of loose powder near the cartridge bags. It happens when a cartridge breaks apart during handling, or when the gun fires back due to a misfire and the charge burns out of the vent hole. The burns are superficial, covering the dorsal forearms from the wrist to the elbow. You irrigate them with water and cover them with cloth soaked in linseed oil, which is what you have. The man says the pain is tolerable. You believe him because the alternative is not. You send him back up. The guns above shift again. The rhythm changes for the 3rd time. What you hear now is something closer and more specific. The sound of a ship very near, close enough that you can hear the impact of shot through your hull and feel, seconds later, the vibration of our shot leaving through theirs. 2 ships firing into each other at a range of perhaps 20 yards, perhaps less, close enough to throw a rope and make fast. The Redoubtable. You do not know her name yet. You will find out later. She is a French 74-gun ship of the line, and she has sailed close alongside Victory on the port side, and her captain Jean-Jacques Lucas has trained his crew in a tactic that most French captains have not. He has put sharpshooters in the rigging, marines and sailors with muskets, positioned in the tops above the quarterdeck level, firing down at the enemy decks. The range from the top of the Redoutable's mizzen to the quarterdeck of HMS Victory is approximately 50 feet. The musket is a smoothbore flintlock weapon. At 50 feet, its accuracy is as close to certain as a smoothbore can achieve. The marine or sailor who fires it loads a ball of approximately half an inch in diameter, backed by a charge of black powder, and when it ignites and the ball leaves the barrel, the ball is traveling at roughly 1,000 feet per second. What it does when it strikes a human body depends on where it strikes and at what angle. At 50 feet, the ball has lost almost none of its velocity. At 50 feet, the ball does not slow down inside a body. It keeps moving. The ball that strikes Nelson enters at the left shoulder above the epaulette. It travels downward at an angle of approximately 45 degrees. It passes through the left lung. It severs a branch of the pulmonary artery. It fractures 2 ribs on its path. It strikes the sixth thoracic vertebra and embeds itself there. Beatty will locate it during the post-mortem examination 4 days from now on a table in the Admiral's cabin. He will find the ball still surrounded by the gold lacing from the epaulette, which it carried into the body with it. You do not know any of this yet. What you know is that the nature of the sound above you changed at around 1:30 in the afternoon. What you know is that a minute or two after that change, the cockpit went quiet for about 3 seconds, a stillness that had nothing to do with the battle outside, a stillness that originated from somewhere in the room behind you, from the direction where Beatty was working. And then John the Loblolly boy, who is 15 years old and does not cry easily, made a sound that you have never heard from him before. You turn around. The man lying on the blankets against the curved aft wall of the cockpit is smaller than you expected. You have seen Nelson before on the quarterdeck at a distance in good light. He is a slight man. One arm, one functioning eye. The decorations on his coat are 4 stars sewn in sequins, not real jewels, for wear at sea. In the lamplight of the cockpit, he looks like a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. He is breathing. His eyes are tracking. He is conscious and coherent. He asks Beatty something, and Beatty answers him in a low voice that you cannot make out. You understand what Beatty's posture means. You have seen that posture before, the particular stillness of a surgeon who has made a determination and is now managing the consequences of that determination rather than trying to alter it. The ball has entered at the left shoulder. Betty has told you before, in the abstract, as a medical matter, that a ball entering at that angle in that location will almost certainly travel downward through the lung and strike the spine. The pain of a spinal injury is of a specific kind, not just the location of impact, but an electrical quality that radiates along the paths of the nerves. A man who has been shot in the spine knows something is wrong in a way that is different from other wounds. It has a quality of finality to it that other wounds do not. You know that Nelson knows. He has been in enough battles to know what a survivable wound feels like. Beatty goes back to the instruments, not for surgery. He draws the laudanum and gives it to Nelson carefully, measuring the dose with attention, because too much will depress the breathing, and he is not going to allow Nelson to die of the medicine before the wound has done what it is going to do. You watch this for a moment. Then you turn back to your table. There is a man waiting. You go back to work. The battle above continues. You track its progress not by what you can see nothing, but by what arrives in the cockpit. The nature of the wounds tells you things. When the wounds are from ball and splinter, the ship is still in broadside exchange. When you begin to see musket wounds, small, clean entry, no internal explosion of tissue, the ships are very close or the sharpshooters are active. You have seen 3 musket wounds in the last 20 minutes. Then 4. Then a man with a musket wound to the upper chest who tells you, in the halting way of a man in shock, that the Admiral has been shot. You say, I know, he is here. The man looks past you. You put your hand on his face and gently turn it back toward you. You say, look at me. He looks at you. You do your work. At some point in the mid-afternoon, Hardy comes down again. He goes directly to where Nelson is lying. You hear their voices, but not the words. Then Hardy goes up. Then a long time passes, during which the guns above, slowly, gradually, begin to change. Not to stop, but to change. The frequency drops. The intervals between shots lengthen. The sound of impacts on your own hull decreases. And then, gradually, from above, not through the gun ports, not through the ladder shafts, but somehow through the structure of the ship itself, through the wood and iron and rope, you begin to hear something that is not the battle. It takes you a full minute to identify what it is. It is men cheering. Not the disciplined, wave-by-wave cheering of the morning, something messier and louder and less organized. The sound of men who are no longer following a signal, but who are expressing something they cannot hold in anymore. You look up at the overhead timbers. Then you look across the cockpit to where Nelson is lying. His eyes are open. He is listening. His lips move. You cannot hear the words from where you are. But Beatty is leaning down beside him, and Beatty hears them. And Beatty's face does something that Beatty's face does not usually do. You go back to the man in front of you. You go back to work. But you are listening. And the sound coming through the timbers above you is still cheering. Louder now, building, and somewhere inside that sound is the answer to the question every man on this ship has been carrying since the fleet of 33 appeared on the horizon at first light. You know the answer. You can hear it in the way the sound is building. You finish the wound in front of you. You fold the cloth. You cut the thread. The ship is still moving. The guns are still firing somewhere, but distantly now at the edges. The cockpit is still full of men. The lantern is still swinging. And Nelson is still breathing. For now. Still breathing, still listening to what is coming through the wood and the rope and the iron of the ship he has sailed on for 2 years. You listen with him. The sound builds. Nelson turns his head slightly. He says something to Beatty. Beatty leans down. He answers. Whatever the answer is, Nelson receives it with the stillness of a man who has just had a long calculation confirmed. He closes his eyes. Not the way a man closes his eyes when he is unconscious, the deliberate way. The way a man closes his eyes when he has heard what he needed to hear and can now put down the last thing he was holding. You watch this from across the room, over the head of the man on your table, through the lantern-lit haze of the cockpit. The sounds of celebration coming through the hull above are real. The battle is won. 22 enemy ships will strike their colors by evening. Villeneuve's flagship, the Bucentaur, will surrender. The Santissima Trinidad, the largest warship in the world, a 4-decked monster carrying 130 guns, will surrender. The plan that Napoleon ordered and Villeneuve feared and Nelson designed is complete. Trafalgar is won. Napoleon will never again attempt the invasion of England. The Channel will remain British water. The Royal Navy will dominate the world's oceans for the next 100 years. What is happening in this cockpit right now, in this small yellow-lit space beneath the waterline, will be the hinge on which a century turns, and 200 years later the square at the center of London will carry the name of this afternoon. You know none of this yet. You know only the man on your table and the suture that needs closing, and you close it. And then, through the wood above you, so clear you do not need to question it, you hear three words shouted by a voice that is not trying to be calm anymore. Victory, our victory. You do not move for a moment. You stand very still in the middle of the cockpit with a pair of suture scissors in your hand, and you let that information arrive in your body the way cold water arrives, completely all at once, from the outside in. Then the man on the table says your name, and you go back to work. The cheering does not stop all at once. It fades in stages, the way a fire fades, the loudest parts first, then the steady parts, then the last of it dying away into something quieter. What replaces it is not silence. There is no silence on this ship. What replaces it is the sound of work, men calling out damage reports, the hammer of the carpenter's crew moving through the lower decks, stopping at each wound in the hull, assessing, plugging, moving on. The sound of rigging being cut free from where it has fallen. A loose block somewhere above, swinging against the mast in the new wind that has begun to rise. The battle is over. You have not stopped working. The last 2 hours have brought a different kind of wound than the early battle. Not the clean impact of shot and splinter from an enemy broadside, but the accumulated injuries of men who have been working at extreme physical intensity for 4 hours. Burst blood vessels in the hands from the shock of the gun recoil. A man who has been partially deafened by standing too close to the vent of his gun for too long, blood coming from both ears. Crush injuries from fallen spars. One man with a severe burn on his neck and jaw from a slow match cord that came loose and fell while the gun was being loaded. You treat what you can treat. You work until the table is clear for the first time since 11:30 this morning. You stand upright and your back reports to you about the past 4 hours in detail. You look across the cockpit. Beatty is sitting on the deck beside Nelson, not working, just sitting. One hand resting on the blankets near Nelson's arm. The posture of a man who has done everything that can be done and is now simply present. Nelson is still alive. You have tracked this knowledge the way you track everything in the cockpit, not with your full attention, but with the peripheral awareness you have learned to maintain, the background monitoring that tells you the status of everyone in the room without requiring you to look directly. He has been speaking intermittently throughout the afternoon, sometimes to Beatty, sometimes to men who have come down from the upper decks, once for a period of several minutes to Captain Hardy. He has asked repeatedly how the battle is going. He has been told. He has asked that Lady Hamilton and his daughter Horatia be taken care of. He has asked that he not be thrown overboard. The specific request about not being thrown overboard is not unusual. It is the fear of every sailor who dies at sea, to be slipped over the side with no marker, no grave, no permanence. There is nothing more present in the naval imagination than the image of the sea taking a man and closing over him without any evidence that he existed. Nelson has won 3 major naval battles. He has been wounded severely 4 times. He has given the better part of his adult life to the Royal Navy. And lying on blankets in the cockpit of his own flagship, with a French musket ball lodged against his spine, He is afraid of the same thing every ordinary sailor fears. You understand something about him in that moment that the pamphlets and the broadsheets will not capture. Beatty looks up and sees you looking. He shakes his head slightly. Not yet. But soon. You go to the water barrel and drink. You have not eaten or drunk anything since before dawn. The water is stale but clean. You drink 3 cups. You look at your hands. Your hands are the hands of someone else, someone who has spent a day doing what your hands have done, and they are steady, which surprises you, and then does not surprise you. There is a sound above, not guns, not cheering. The specific groan of timber under stress, a mast flexing in the new wind. The wind has been building for the past hour. You can feel it in the movement of the hull, a new liveliness in the way the ship sits in the water, the motion beginning to return. This is not a good sign. A fleet in the aftermath of battle, with damaged rigging and compromised hulls, does not want a rising wind, but the wind does not consult the fleet. You sit down on the deck and rest your back against the hull. The heat has gone out of the day. Even 6 decks below the waterline, you can feel the quality of the light changing above, the afternoon thinning toward evening, the angle of what comes down the ladder shafts shifting from gold to gray. In the orlop lantern light, the cockpit looks the same as it has looked all afternoon. But the rhythm of it has changed. It is slower now. The Loblolly boys are sitting against the wall. John has his knees drawn up, his eyes open, staring at the deck in front of him. You look at him for a moment. You say, "You did well today." He does not respond immediately. Then he nods once without looking up. You think about what he has carried down these ladders today. You do not try to count. You close your eyes for a moment and then open them, because closing them produces images you are not ready to look at yet. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, the quality of the cockpit changes. It changes the way a room changes when someone who has been in it for a long time is no longer in it. Not a sound, not a visible event. A change in the weight of the air. Beatty says something to the man beside him. Quiet, 1 word. Then he sits back. You know what has happened before he says anything. You knew it was coming. You have known all afternoon. But knowing a thing is coming and having it arrive are different in a way that is hard to articulate afterward. Vice Admiral Horatio Lord Nelson, dead at 4:32 in the afternoon on the 21st of October, 1805, aged 47 years. The last thing he said, in a voice so quiet the men beside him had to lean down to hear it, was, "Thank God, I have done my duty." He said it more than once, not once, as the pamphlets will later suggest, 4 or 5 times, at intervals, as if testing the phrase against the reality of his situation and finding it still adequate. You stand up. You do not know what to do with yourself for a moment. You are 24 years old, and you have just watched the most famous naval commander in British history die 6 feet from where you were treating a laceration, and the battle he won is over, and the ships outside are the battered remains of 2 fleets that have spent 4 hours destroying each other, and the wind is rising, and you are standing in the orlop deck of HMS Victory with your hands at your sides. You pick up a cloth from the instrument table. You begin cleaning the instruments. It is something to do with your hands. The capital saw first. You wipe it carefully along the blade, from heel to toe, checking the teeth as you go. Then the bone saw. Then the Catlin knife. You work through the set methodically, cleaning each instrument, setting it back in its place on the cloth, moving to the next. There is a practice among surgeons that Beatty has never spoken about directly, but that you have inferred from watching him. After a significant case, after a death on the table, after an amputation gone wrong, after any case where the outcome was not what the work required, he cleans the instruments in a particular order, not the order they were used. The order they were laid out at the beginning, the original order, the order from before the case began, when everything was still possible. You have adopted this practice without being taught it. You clean the instruments in the order they were laid this morning, in the gray light before dawn, when you and Beatty arranged them together and the cockpit smelled of vinegar and possibility. It takes about 10 minutes. When you finish, the instruments are as clean as you can make them in this light with what you have, and they are in the correct order, and the cloth is smooth flat beneath them. You sit down again. There is a boy in the corner of the cockpit who is perhaps 13 years old. Not a loblolly boy, a powder monkey, one of the children who run cartridges from the magazine to the guns during battle, small enough to move quickly through the narrow passages, carrying charges of black powder in wooden boxes held close to the body to keep them from the sparks. He has a wound on his left arm that has been cleaned and wrapped, but he has not been taken back up yet, either because there is nowhere better for him to go, or because someone decided he should stay here until he is steadier. He is not crying. He is sitting very still, his wrapped arm held against his chest, his eyes moving slowly around the room. He looks at you. You look at him. You say, "What is your name?" He says, "William." You say, "How old are you, William?" He says, 14. The way he says it tells you he is probably 12. You say, "Are you in pain?" He considers the question seriously. Then he says, "Not very much." You nod. You say, "That is good." You say, "The worst part is over." He thinks about this. Then he says, "Did we win?" You say, "Yes." He nods. He looks back at the deck in front of him. After a moment, he says, "I knew we would." You say nothing, but you find that you believe him, not because he had any particular information, but because of the way he says it, the simple certainty of it, the way children sometimes hold convictions that adults have learned to qualify. Outside, through the hull, you can hear the aftermath of the battle settling into its new shape. The sound of prize crews boarding captured ships. 22 enemy vessels have struck their colors by the end of the day, have lowered their flags in the formal signal of surrender. You will learn the number later. Right now you can hear the sound of men moving between ships, of signals being passed, of the slow work of consolidation beginning. 22 ships. In the history of naval warfare, there is no comparable afternoon. The combined Franco-Spanish fleet had 33 ships at the start of the day. They have lost 22 of them, captured or destroyed, and the remainder are fleeing toward Cadiz. The British fleet has not lost a single ship, not one. 1,366 British sailors and Marines are dead or wounded. The enemy casualties are approximately 7 times that number. 8,000 men, dead or wounded, in 4 hours of fighting in the Atlantic off Cape Trafalgar. You clean the last instrument. You set it down. The cockpit has stilled around you. The wounded men who are stable enough to be aware of their surroundings are aware that something has happened. The information has moved through the room the way information moves through a small space, without announcement needed. Some of them know from Beatty's posture. Some of them know because they were watching. Some of them know because they have been in battle before, and they recognize the particular quality of the silence that follows a significant death. Nobody speaks. You sit back down on the deck. Your back finds the hull planking again. The hull is colder than it was this morning. The evening temperature of the Atlantic is dropping. You think about the instruments you have just cleaned. You think about the number of times you used them today. You do not try to recall specific faces. The faces are there, but you are not going to look at them right now. Right now, you are going to sit against this hull and feel the cold of it, and listen to the ship moving in the rising wind, and not think about anything specific. This is a skill you have developed. It is not detachment. It is deferral. The things you are not looking at are still there. They will be there when you are ready to look at them. One of the Loblolly boys brings you biscuit and a cup of water. You eat. The biscuit is hard as wood and tastes of salt and must. The way ship's biscuit always tastes. It takes real effort to bite through. You eat it anyway, piece by piece, methodically, the same way you cleaned the instruments. Somewhere above you, on the quarterdeck where the battle was fought, men are doing what has to be done. The dead are being collected. In naval practice, the dead are sewn into their hammocks with a cannonball at the feet, to ensure they sink, and committed to the sea with the appropriate words read from the Book of Common Prayer. There will be a great many hammocks tonight. The carpenter's crew is moving through the ship with lanterns, checking the damage to the hull, recording every strike, every split timber, every compromised spar. The rigging is in poor condition. Much of it has been shot away or damaged. And what can be spliced is being spliced, and what cannot is being cleared. The ship is damaged. She can sail, but she is damaged. And the wind is still rising. Beatty comes to sit beside you. He does not say anything for a moment. He has a cup of water. He drinks. Then he says, 57 dead, including the Admiral. 440 wounded, including many serious. His voice is the same voice he uses to report medical findings. Precise, toneless. The voice of a man who has put the feeling aside to be collected later. You nod. He says, "You worked well today." You say, "So did you." He says yes. He drinks the rest of his water. He looks at the hull across from him for a long moment. Then he stands and goes back to the patients. You sit a while longer. The ship moves in the building swell. The wind has found the damaged rigging and is working it, producing a sound unlike the normal voice of the ship, a higher pitch, more irregular, the sound of structure that has been compromised, trying to hold its shape under load. You have sailed in bad weather before. You know the difference between the sound of a healthy ship in a gale and the sound of a damaged one in the same gale. What you are hearing is the second kind. Hardy will know this. The other captains will know this. They are already making decisions about how to handle 22 prize ships with damaged crews and compromised rigging in a wind that is still building. Those decisions are not yours to make. Your job is the cockpit. Your job is the instruments and the wounds and the men who come down the ladders. Your job today has been done, and it will be done again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the wind is rising, and the ship is damaged, and Nelson is dead, and somewhere above you 56 other men are sewn into their hammocks waiting for the words to be read. You close your eyes. This time the images do not come. What comes instead is the sound of the ship, the creak and flex of the hull, the new voice of the damaged rigging, the groan of the masts taking the wind, the slap of water against the hull, faster now, less regular, the chop of a sea beginning to build. You have been on this ship for 14 months. You know her voice. She is hurting, but she is whole. She is moving. She will keep moving. You press the back of your head against the hull planking, and you listen to the ship breathe, and you let yourself be carried. Above you, on a ship with no enemy left to fight, 800 men are moving through the evening doing what sailors do after a battle, checking, repairing, counting, mourning, eating when there is food, sleeping when there is a moment. The work of survival is not dramatic. It is this, the next task, done carefully, and then the one after that. You understand this. You have understood it for a long time. The lantern above swings once in the ship's new motion, steadies, swings again, stays. Outside, the Atlantic is changing. The flat calm that let the fleets maneuver all morning is gone. The surface is running now, gray-green, short, steep waves driven by the southwest wind. The sky above has closed in from the direction of Spain. The barometer on the quarterdeck has been falling all afternoon. The men on the upper decks can see what is coming. You cannot see it, but you can feel it in the ship. Tomorrow is going to be a different kind of day. Tonight there is this, the lantern, the hull, the sound of men settling around you in the dark, the smell of the cockpit, vinegar and blood and tallow smoke, which you no longer notice and will carry in your clothes for weeks, the cold of the hull against your back. In the corner, William the powder monkey has fallen asleep sitting upright, his wrapped arm still held against his chest. His head has dropped forward. He breathes with the complete absence of difficulty that children have, even in hard places. You watch him for a moment. You think he will tell this story for the rest of his life. He will be an old man in a chair somewhere, and young people will ask him, and he will say, "I was there. I was on the Victory. I carried the powder up to the guns. I was there when Nelson died." And they will believe him, and he will deserve to be believed, and the story he tells will be true, and it will also be smaller than the thing itself, the way all stories are smaller than the things they describe. The smell of the cockpit, the weight of the wooden powder box, the sound of the guns through the hull planking. These things do not fit in a story told in a chair by an old man. They live only here, in the body that experienced them, and they will end when that body ends. You understand that you are also going to tell this story. Not tonight, not for a long time, but eventually somewhere. You are going to say the words, "I was there," and the words will be true, and they will be insufficient, and you will say them anyway because that is what people do with the true and insufficient things they have lived through. The ship moves under you, still moving. West-northwest, toward Gibraltar, away from the coast of Spain, carrying what is left of the day toward the night. The storm arrives before dawn. You feel it first in the motion of the hull, not the gentle roll of the previous night, not the liveliness of a ship in a freshening breeze, but something more fundamental, a deep, slow heave from the southwest, the kind of swell that has traveled a long distance before it reaches you, the kind that carries the weight of open ocean behind it. The ship rises and falls in a single long arc, and at the bottom of each arc there is a moment when the structure of her groans along its entire length, the sound of thousands of tons of timber and iron and rope being asked to hold together under forces that are for the moment manageable. For the moment. You wake from a sleep you did not know you had fallen into and lie still in your hammock listening to the ship. The hammock sways in the new motion. The lantern at the end of the orlop passage has guttered down to almost nothing. You can see the faint reddish glow of the wick, but almost no useful light. Around you in the darkness, the breathing of the other men in their hammocks is slow and heavy. They are sleeping through it. Most of them have been at sea long enough that a building swell does not reach them in sleep. You have been at sea 14 months. You are still not entirely at ease with weather. You swing your legs out of the hammock and dress in the dark. Your hands find the buttons in order, the way hands do when they have done the same thing enough times. You put on your coat. You check that the laudanum bottle is still secure against the hull where you placed it last night, wrapped in cloth, wedged into the angle between the rib and the planking. It is there. You go out into the passage. The orlop deck in the early morning is a world of its own. No daylight reaches here at any hour. The lanterns that burn along the passage burn the same at midnight as at noon, the same in storm as in calm, small fixed points of orange light that do not change regardless of what the sea is doing outside. The sounds are different, though. Right now, the sounds are the sounds of a ship in building weather. The creak has become a groan. The flex has become a shudder. And somewhere far above you, there is a banging that you identify, after a moment, as a loose block working against a damaged spar. You think about the prize ships. 22 enemy vessels taken in yesterday's battle. Their crews disarmed, prize crews put aboard minus perhaps a dozen British sailors apiece. Not enough to work the ship in normal conditions. Certainly not enough in a gale. The prize ships are damaged, many of them seriously. Some have been hulled below the waterline and are being kept afloat by the pumps. Their rigging is shot away in places. Their captains are prisoners. Their surviving crews are below decks under guard. And the storm is coming for all of them. You think about what it means to be a French or Spanish sailor right now, below decks on a captured ship in a rising sea, with a prize crew of 12 British sailors overhead trying to work a vessel none of them know, in weather that is building toward a gale. You have been below decks in bad weather. You know what it sounds like when a ship is being pushed toward its limits, the particular quality of stress in the timbers, the way the pumps change their rhythm, the sound of men running rather than walking on the decks above. Those men on the prize ships are listening to the same sounds. and they cannot do anything about it. You make your way forward to the cockpit and light the main lantern from your hand lamp. The cockpit looks in the lantern light as it always does, the instruments on their cloth, the barrels beneath the surgical table, the buckets. You have cleaned everything and arranged everything, and it is ready, the same as it was yesterday morning, the same as it will be tomorrow morning. The wounded men who are stable enough have been moved to the lower deck, where the hammocks give them at least the comfort of motion rather than the hard deck of the orlop. Those who cannot be safely moved remain here, in the spaces between the ship's frames, on folded blankets, tended through the night by the loblolly boys in rotation. You check them in order: pulse, breathing, dressings. A man with a chest wound who is running a fever. His skin is hot under your hand and his breathing is faster than it should be. This is the beginning of what you cannot stop. Fever after a wound of this kind is almost certain. Whether the fever breaks or continues will depend on things you have no control over. And you know this, and you check the dressing, and you change it, and you note the fever, and you move to the next man. The boy William is still there, in the corner where he fell asleep. He is awake now, watching you work your way around the room. He has his knees drawn up, and his wrapped arm resting on them. You say, "How is the arm this morning?" He says, "It hurts." You say, "That is correct. That means it is working." He considers this. He says, "Does it always hurt?" You say, "For a while, then less." He nods. He watches you. Then he says, "What are you going to do today?" You think about the question. Then you say, "The same things I did yesterday." He says, "Even with the storm coming." You look at him. You say, "Where did you hear about a storm?" He says, "The carpenter's mate said so last night. He said the barometer was very low." You say, "Then yes, even with the storm." He accepts this with the equanimity of a 12-year-old who has already survived a major naval battle and does not have much room left in his scale of frightening things. The storm builds through the morning. By 8 in the morning, the swell has increased to the point where the ship is rolling 15 degrees to each side, and the sound of the damaged rigging is constant. On the upper decks, men are working to secure everything that can be secured. Hatches battened, loose gear lashed, the gun port lids closed and latched against the water that would otherwise come through. The prize ships on the horizon are becoming harder to see through the spray and the lowering sky, their silhouettes intermittent between the wave crests. Beatty comes to the cockpit at mid-morning. He looks at the patients. He looks at you. He asks about the fever case. You tell him what you told yourself. The fever is established. The dressing is clean. There is nothing else you can do beyond what you are doing. He nods. He says, "There is something you should see." You follow him. He takes you not up to the gun decks, but aft along the orlop, toward the great cabin. In normal circumstances, the great cabin is Nelson's quarters, the spacious, light-filled space at the stern of the ship, with its row of tall windows looking aft over the admiral's table. In these circumstances, it is something else. The body of Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson lies in the great cabin in a cask. Not a wooden coffin, a large cask, a leaguer, which is the largest cask used aboard ship, capable of holding 210 gallons of liquid. It has been emptied and cleaned and fitted with a wooden lid. It has been filled to approximately 2/3 capacity with a mixture of brandy and spirits of wine. The preservation of Nelson's body for transport back to England is a practical problem, and this is the practical solution. The journey to England will take weeks in the heat of a ship's hold. Without preservation, a body does not last days. The brandy will retard decomposition sufficiently to get him home intact. This is not an elegant solution, but it is what there is. You stand at the doorway of the great cabin and look at the cask. The room smells of brandy and the sea. Through the stern windows, those tall, salt-hazed windows, you can see the building weather, the sky, the color of old iron, the white streaks on the faces of the long Atlantic swells. You think, this is the most famous man in England. This is the man whose name your father spoke to you when you were a boy standing in a Yorkshire field. This is the man who won the Nile and Copenhagen, and now Trafalgar. And he is in a brandy cask in the stern of his own flagship, because there is no better way to get him home, and it does not matter because he is dead, and the living do not get to choose how the dead are carried. You think about what Beatty told you, quietly, in the cockpit the evening after the battle, that he will write everything down. The wound, the sequence of events, the exact words Nelson spoke. He has already begun the notes. He will publish an account, a narrative of the death of Lord Nelson, and it will be read by thousands of people who were nowhere near this ship on that afternoon. You are in those notes, not by name perhaps, but the things you did, the instruments you passed, the men you treated while Beatty attended to Nelson. Those things are in the notes. They happened in the same room. They are part of the same record. You stand there for perhaps 20 seconds. Then you go back to the cockpit. The storm hits fully by early afternoon. What arrives is a south-southwest gale of the kind the Atlantic produces in late October. Not the most severe weather these waters are capable of, but severe enough for a fleet of damaged ships in the aftermath of a major battle. The wind comes in at force 8 by any reasonable estimate, perhaps force 9 in the gusts. The sea builds to a corresponding state. The swell is long and deep, and the wave faces are breaking at their tops, and the spray is driving horizontally. HMS Victory handles it. She is damaged, but she was built for this. 3,500 tons, copper sheathed below the waterline, her pumps working, her surviving rigging tightened and checked. She rolls heavily in the cross swell, but her hull is sound and her keel is true, and she moves through it with the slow, insistent momentum of a very large object that has been doing this for 40 years. The prize ships do not handle it as well. Throughout the afternoon you hear, from men coming below to the cockpit with minor injuries from the stormwork, fragments of what is happening to the fleet. A French ship of the line has gone aground on the shoals near Cadiz. Another is sinking, her pumps overwhelmed, her prize crew taken off just before she went under. A third has broken free of her prize crew entirely, her surviving sailors overpowering the British prize crew, and is making for Cadiz under her own colors. By evening, of the 22 ships taken in battle, 11 will be lost, sunk, grounded, or retaken by their crews in the storm. 11 ships, the largest prize fleet in British naval history, taken in the most decisive naval victory of the age, and half of them gone in 24 hours to the weather. There is nothing to be done about this. The weather does not negotiate. You think about the numbers: 22 ships taken, 11 lost in the storm. The men who sailed as prize crews on those 11 ships, some of them drowned, some taken prisoner again, some lucky enough to be taken off before their ship went under. The French and Spanish sailors below decks on those ships, some of them freed by the recapture, some of them drowned alongside the prize crew in ships that went down without time to open the hatches. War produces these accountings. You have learned to observe them without commentary. The numbers are real, and the men behind them are real, and there is no adequate response to either of these facts. You note them, you carry them, you do not resolve them because they do not resolve. You work through the afternoon. The storm produces its own injuries, separate from the battles. A man with a dislocated shoulder from being thrown against a gun carriage when the ship rolled unexpectedly. A man with 3 broken fingers from a line that ran out too fast through his hands. A boy, not William, another boy, perhaps 14, with a deep laceration across the palm from a knife that slipped when the deck moved under him. You set the shoulder, you splint the fingers, you close the palm with 8 stitches and tell him to keep it clean. The boy with the palm laceration looks at you when you say this, and you can tell he is trying not to show that it hurt more than he expected. You say, "You did well." He looks at you. Something in his face changes very slightly. The way a face changes when it has been holding something in and is given permission not to. You go back to the instrument table. Outside, the storm is doing what storms do. It does not know about the battle that was fought yesterday. It does not know about the 22 ships, or the 57 dead, or the man in the brandy cask in the great cabin. The Atlantic in late October is the Atlantic in late October, and the low-pressure system moving northeast from the direction of the Azores is following its own logic, and the fleet is in its path, and that is all. By evening, the worst of it is past. The gale does not stop, but the worst of it eases. The barometer, which has been falling all day, steadies. The gusts become less frequent. The wave faces stop breaking at their tops. The ship's rolling moderates from 15 degrees to 10, and then, by 8 in the evening, to 8. You eat hard biscuit, salt pork that has been boiled somewhere above, small beer. You eat without tasting it, because that is not what eating is for right now. You eat because the body requires it, and the body is not done with its requirements. After you eat, you go back to check the fever case. The man's temperature has not broken. His skin is still hot, his breathing still fast and shallow. He is awake, and he looks at you when you come to him, and his eyes are clear, which is something. Fever without delirium is better than fever with it. You change the dressing. You give him water. You tell him the storm is easing. He says, "Is that good?" You say, "It is better." He closes his eyes. You sit beside him for a little while, not doing anything, just there. You have learned that this matters, the presence of another person, close by, awake, attending. It does not change the fever, but it changes something else, something you do not have a medical name for, something that is not in Beatty's books. The lantern swings in the last of the gale's motion. The ship settles. Around you, in the spaces between the frames, the wounded men are sleeping or close to it. John is at the end of the passage, his back against the hull, his eyes closed. William is in his corner. The instruments are on their cloth. The cockpit smells of vinegar and the sea. Tomorrow Victory will make for Gibraltar. The passage will take several days, depending on the wind. In Gibraltar, the most seriously wounded will be put ashore into the Naval Hospital, and the ship will be assessed for repair, and decisions will be made about what happens next. You will do your part in those decisions by doing what you do. There is a moment, somewhere in the middle of the night, when the wind drops just enough that the ship's motion changes, and you find yourself suddenly, unexpectedly, wide awake. You lie still and listen. John is in the passage outside, no longer asleep. You can hear him moving quietly, checking the patients the way you checked them 3 hours ago. He does not know you are awake. You listen to him work. He stops at each man in turn. You hear the small sounds of it, the shift of cloth, the quiet question asked in a low voice, the answering murmur. He has been doing this all night. You did not ask him to. He simply understood that someone needed to. And he is 15 years old, and he has been on this ship for 2 years. And this is what 2 years on this ship produces in a person of his particular quality. You think about what he will do when he leaves the Navy. He has said almost nothing about his life before the ship. You know his given name, and you know he is from somewhere near Bristol, and you know he can read, which is not universal among boys his age. Beyond that, he is the sum of what you have observed, quick on the ladders, calm with the wounded, able to apply a tourniquet with adequate pressure on the first attempt, which is not a skill most men possess the first time they need it. Whatever he does when he leaves here, he will be good at it. You hear him say something to the fever case, a few words, quietly. The fever case answers. You close your eyes. Outside, the gale has reduced to a strong wind, the kind of wind that a ship in sound condition handles without remark. Victory is not in entirely sound condition, but she is handling it. The motion is steadier than it was. The groaning in the rigging has become something closer to the ordinary voice of the ship in weather. The pumps are running, but slowly, their rhythm even, not urgent. She is hurt, but she is working. You think about the men who built her. 40 years ago, somewhere in a dockyard in Chatham, men whose names are not recorded placed English oak plank against English oak frame and drove iron bolts through both and sealed the seams with oakum and pitch and launched the result into the Medway. Those men have been dead for years. The ship they built has fought 3 major engagements and survived a gale of force 8 and is making for Gibraltar with a reduced crew in the dark of an October night. And the work they did 40 years ago is what is keeping every man aboard her alive right now. You think about this often. The work that holds things together. John finishes his round and goes back to his position in the passage. You hear him settle against the wall. In a minute or two, his breathing slows. The lantern steadies. Outside, across what is left of the gale, the scattered fleet of both nations moves through the October dark. British ships making for Gibraltar, French and Spanish survivors making for Cadiz, prize ships that are still prize ships holding their course as best their small crews can manage, prize ships that are. Outside, across what is left of the gale, the scattered fleet of both nations moves through the October dark, British ships making for Gibraltar, French and Spanish survivors making for Cadiz, prize ships that are still prize ships, holding their course as best their small crews can manage. Prize ships that are no longer prize ships, heading for the nearest friendly harbor. The sea between them is full of wreckage. Broken spars, canvas, rope. The things that come off ships in battle and in weather. And somewhere in the dark, the hammocks. 57 of them, sewn shut, weighted with iron, committed to the sea at first light this morning with the words read from the Book of Common Prayer by the ship's chaplain, his voice barely audible over the building wind. The words of the burial service at sea are the same words used on land, with one substitution. On land, we commit his body to the ground. At sea, we commit his body to the deep. The change is one word. The difference is absolute. On land, there is a place to return to, a stone with a name on it, a location that persists. At sea, there is only water closing over, water that does not keep a record of what it receives. You have stood at those commitments before. Not today. Today the storm came too fast and there was too much to do in the cockpit. But you know the sound of it. The chaplain's voice, the slide of the plank, the splash. The silence that follows, which is not really silence because the sea is never silent, but which functions as silence in the way that some absences function as presence. 57 men. You think of them for a moment. Then you let yourself be carried by the ship's motion. The sea outside is quieter now. The night is long, and you are tired, and Gibraltar is 4 days away. Sleep comes quietly, like a tide coming in, without announcement, and the ship moves through the dark. Gibraltar appears on the 4th morning. You are on the orlop deck when the news comes down through the ship. Not an announcement, not a signal, but the specific change in the quality of noise above that tells you something has been sighted, a shift in the voices, a quickening of movement. And then, from a man coming down the forward ladder with a message for the purser, the word landfall. You have not been on the upper decks since the battle. You go up now. The ladder from the orlop to the lower gun deck, then the lower gun deck to the middle, then the middle to the upper, then the upper to the weather deck. 4 ladders, each one narrower and steeper than you remember, the light changing at each level from lamplight to gray daylight until you come out through the hatch onto the upper deck, and the wind hits you and the sky is enormous. You stand at the rail and look. The Rock of Gibraltar is 20 miles ahead, rising from the water with an abruptness that seems to deny everything flat and oceanic about the world you have been living in for the past 4 days. Gray rock, nearly 1,400 feet at the summit, the morning cloud sitting in a band around it at about 1,000 feet. Below the cloud, the rock is bare and particular and real in the way that land is always more real than sea after you have been at sea long enough. The smell of the upper deck is different from the orlop. Salt air. The pitch on the deck seems. The clean cold of an October Atlantic morning. After 4 days below in the cockpit, with its particular smell, you have to stand still for a moment and let your senses adjust. You hold the rail and look at Gibraltar and breathe. Around you, the upper deck is busy. Men working the rigging, checking the lines, preparing for the approach to anchorage. The damage from the battle is visible everywhere up here in a way it is not below. A replaced section of rail that is newer wood than its surroundings, a jury-rigged spar on the foremast where the original was shot away, the quarterdeck planking replaced in two places where the originals were torn up. The shot holes in the hull above the waterline have been plugged but not repaired, the plugs visible as slightly different colored patches against the black of the upper hull. She looks like what she is, a ship that has been through something. But she is here. She made it. 400 miles from Cape Trafalgar to Gibraltar in 4 days with damaged rigging and a reduced crew and the bodies of 57 men already in the sea behind her. She made it. You stay on deck until the anchor goes down in Gibraltar Bay, and then you go back below. The most seriously wounded come off the ship first, carried on stretchers made from hammocks slung between spars, lowered into the boats that come alongside from the Naval Hospital on shore. You supervise the transfer of 9 men from the cockpit. You check each man one more time before he goes over the side, dressing, pulse, a brief assessment of their coherence. The fever case is among them. He is alive. His fever has not broken, but it has not worsened. He looks at you when you come to him, and you tell him he is going to the hospital, and he nods, and that is all. The boy William went back up to the gun deck 2 days ago, cleared fit for duty by Beatty and apparently content with this. You saw him briefly in the passage on his way up. He had his arm in a sling, and he was eating a piece of biscuit, and he nodded at you as he passed. You nod back. You do not see him again. In Gibraltar, the ship stays 4 days. You spend much of that time in the hospital on shore, assisting the naval surgeons there with the overflow from the fleet. The hospital is a converted barracks, its long stone rooms filled with cots, the smell of camphor and linseed oil replacing the vinegar of the cockpit. It is better lit than the cockpit and better ventilated, and there is more space to work and more instruments, and the surgeons here have trained at actual medical schools in Edinburgh and London, not in the back of an apothecary in Skipton. You work beside them without comment. You do what is asked. You learn things. You learn that a man named William Beatty has a reputation in the naval medical establishment that you did not previously know the extent of. 2 of the surgeons here have read his published work. One of them asks you about the battle, about the cockpit, about what you saw and did. You answer him carefully and accurately. He writes some of what you say in a notebook. You think about that afterward, your words in someone else's notebook, the strange transit of a thing from experience to record. What you lived through is inside your body. What you told this man is now in his book. Those 2 things are not the same thing and will never be the same thing. But the second one is what will persist. In 50 years, in 100 years, people will read what was written in books about this battle, and some small part of what you said will be in one of those books, and it will not feel like you. This does not seem wrong to you. It just seems true. Victory sails for England on the 15th of November. She sails not under combat conditions, but under the slow, careful progress of a ship that is damaged and knows it, keeping the wind at a manageable angle, nursing the jury-rigged spars, running with reduced sail. The passage from Gibraltar to Portsmouth in these conditions will take over a month. The North Atlantic in November is not the Mediterranean in October. The weather is colder. The days are shorter. The swell from the north is longer and heavier. You have settled back into the rhythm of the ship. The cockpit is quieter now. The battle wounded who remained aboard are healing, most of them, in the slow and partial way that healing happens. The wound closing, the fever receding, the function returning in stages. You change dressings. You monitor. You note what you see. Beatty is writing his account of the battle and of Nelson's death, working from his surgical notes and his own observations in the great cabin in the evenings. He asks you once for your recollection of the sequence of events in the cockpit during the battle. You give it to him as precisely as you can. He writes it down. The days shorten. The weather off the coast of Portugal is cold and gray, a running sea from the northwest, the sky low. You spend an hour on deck each morning, standing at the rail in your coat, watching the water. It has become a habit. The hour on deck is not for exercise or observation. It is for the quality of the sky and the air and the movement of the sea, which after 4 months below the waterline you have come to need in a way you could not have anticipated. The sea off Portugal in November is the color of old pewter. The waves are long and regular, well organized, the kind of sea that a ship can work with rather than against. The wind comes from the northwest and has a cold edge to it that was not in the October wind off Trafalgar. This is the beginning of winter. England is 3 weeks away. You think about England in the way you think about something you have been absent from long enough that it has started to become abstract. Yorkshire, the cloth merchant's house on the high street in Skipton. Your mother's hands in the washwater, the particular smell of the apothecary, which was nothing like the smell of the cockpit, dried herbs and camphor and the chalk dust of ground medicines. You think about what you are going to say when you get there. You have been a surgeon's mate aboard HMS Victory for 14 months. You were present at the Battle of Trafalgar. You were in the cockpit when the Admiral was brought down. You were in the cockpit when he died. You have treated wounds that you could not have imagined before you saw them, and you have lost men you could not save. And you have saved men who by any reasonable calculation should not have survived. You have lived below the waterline of the most famous warship in the Royal Navy, and you know her voice in weather as well as you know your own. What you are going to say when you get there is, "I am well. The work was hard. I am ready for a rest." You will not say the other things because the other things do not fit in the kind of conversation you will have when you first arrive. Maybe later, maybe in the winter, sitting at a table with enough time and quiet. Maybe then you will say something closer to the truth of it. But you have learned in 14 months that experience does not transfer cleanly into words. What happened in the cockpit on the 21st of October is inside you in a way that language can approach but not fully reach. It lives in the specific memory of the capital saw in your hand, in the smell of the vinegar, in the sound of the hull under the broadside, in the particular stillness of the cockpit when Beatty sat back and said that one word. You carry all of this in your body. You will carry it for the rest of your life. Portsmouth appears on a gray December morning. You are on the upper deck when the coast of England becomes visible, not the dramatic landfall of Gibraltar, no single striking feature, just the low gray-green line of the Hampshire shore resolving out of the gray-green sea and the gray sky, indistinct at first, and then slowly more particular, the shapes of the land becoming themselves. The approach to Portsmouth Harbor takes several hours. The ship moves slowly, guided by the harbor pilots who come out in a boat to meet her, picking her way through the anchorage where other ships of the line lie at their moorings. The harbor is busy in the way that a major naval base is always busy. Boats moving between ships, the sound of hammering from the dockyard, the smell of smoke and tar, and the specific smell of an English winter coast. Word has gone ahead. The news of Trafalgar reached London weeks ago, carried by the schooner Pickle, the fastest vessel in the fleet, dispatched by Captain Collingwood the day after the battle. By the time HMS Victory enters Portsmouth Harbor, England already knows what happened. England has been mourning Nelson for over a month. What England does not fully know yet, what the newspapers and the broadsheets have not been able to capture from the dispatches alone, is what it looked like from inside the ship, what it smelled like, what it cost the men who were there. Boats come alongside as Victory anchors. Officials first, then naval officers, then medical men to assess the wounded. There is a particular boat that comes early, carrying officials from the Admiralty, and you watch from the rail as they come aboard and are escorted aft toward the great cabin. They have come for Nelson, or rather for what remains of Nelson in the brandy cask that has been traveling with you since the day after the battle. You watch the great cabin's stern windows from the rail. You cannot see inside, but you know what is in there, and the men in the boat know what is in there. And in 3 weeks it will lie in state at Greenwich, and 100,000 people will file past to pay their respects. 100,000 people. You think about the cockpit, about the space of it, perhaps 20 feet across, 6 feet of headroom, a door on 2 barrels for a surgical table, the space where Nelson died, the space where you spent the worst and most focused hours of your life working on the men who came down the ladders. No one will come to see that space. No one will build a monument to the cockpit of HMS Victory. The ship will be repaired and returned to service, and the cockpit will be scrubbed and relaid, and the smell of vinegar will go back into the wood, and the next batch of men will come down the ladders in the next battle, and the cockpit will do what it does. This seems correct to you, not bitter, correct. The cockpit was not a place of victory. It was a place of subtraction, a place where the cost of the victory was counted out in pieces. It does not require a monument. It requires only that the men who were there know what they did there and carry it with them, and not forget. You will not forget. The December air is cold on your face. The smell of the harbor is coal smoke and tar and salt mud, and the particular smell of English winter, which is not the smell of Gibraltar or the open Atlantic or the coast of Portugal. It is the smell of home. You are 24 years old. You left England when the leaves were turning, and they are turning again now. You put your hands on the rail and feel the cold iron of it under your palms. The ship is still. For the first time in 14 months, the ship is completely still. No creak of timber in the swell. No flecks of the hull against the water. Just the stillness of a ship at anchor in a harbor, held by her own weight against the December tide. You notice this with your whole body. The stillness. After 14 months of the ship moving under you at every hour of the day and night, in calm and in gale, at anchor and under sail, the ship is still, and your body does not know what to do with this, and you stand at the rail and let the stillness arrive in you the way the brandy cask preserves what it preserves, slowly and completely. You will go ashore tomorrow. There are procedures, the muster, the pay, the documentation. Beatty will write his report. You will be recorded in the log as present and fit for duty. Then there will be shore leave, and then in a few months there will be another posting, another ship, another cockpit to prepare. But that is tomorrow. Tonight the ship is at anchor in Portsmouth Harbor, and the December sky above is low and dark, and you can see the lights of the shore from where you are standing, yellow lights in the windows of the houses, and the taverns, and the chandleries along the harbor front, the lights of England, ordinary and familiar, exactly as they always were. You breathe. You have been breathing for a long time without noticing it. Now you notice. The cold air, the coal smoke, the smell of the English winter. You breathe it in slowly. The ship is still beneath your feet. You let the stillness carry you down, the same way the hammock carried you down on the night before the battle. The same way sleep carries you when you stop fighting it and let it come. The harbor lights waver in the December air. The shore is close. The cold is not uncomfortable. It is simply the cold. And the ship is still, and England is there, right there across the water, and you have done what you came to do. And all of it is behind you now, every hour of it. The vinegar and the saw and the lantern swinging in the dark, the cheering through the hull, the admiral's voice going quiet, the storm and the long passage north, all of it behind you now, settled into the past, into the record, into the part of your life that is finished. You are standing at the rail of HMS Victory in Portsmouth Harbor in December 1805. The night is quiet. The lights are steady. And if you let your eyes close, just for a moment, you can feel the old motion still, the ship's breathing, the slow Atlantic roll carrying you, the way it has carried you for 14 months. The way it will carry you in sleep for years to come, long after you have left this ship and this harbor and returned to the ordinary world of dry land and daylight and the slow passage of ordinary days. Let it carry you now. Let the ship breathe. Let the motion take you where it goes. The lights of Portsmouth are warm in the cold December air. And somewhere across the water, England is waiting. Still waiting, as it always was. Good night. If this story found you tonight, quiet history at bedtime is where it lives. There is more here, millions hours of it, and all of it is made for exactly this. The last quiet part of the day, when the world goes small and the past feels close. Subscribe if you want to stay. Leave a like if this one carried you somewhere. And if you want to be there when the next story begins, the notification bell will bring it to you. Sleep well.